Hey out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to the 71st edition of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast, recorded here in central London, just off historic Abbey Road. And speaking of Abbey Road, yes, we visited Abbey Road and had our picture taken making the crossing. Action Jackson was visiting from the States. He came to London with his family and carved out a little time to see me and so we could listen to some tunes. But what we really wanted to do was get into a rock and roll adventure. So we did a rock tour with a guy named Lee. He has a bus and he has a ton of knowledge about rock and roll and the history of British rock and everything that happened here in London. Such rich tales. And this guy's read, hundreds of books. He's pieced together, he's like a forensic scientist almost of rock and roll, can figure out when people were in certain places and how they moved together, how certain albums got made and shared and all that kind of thing. We just had a blast. We had a killer time and we wanted to talk about it here on the show. But in addition to that, before Jackson got here, I got to see Genesis live at the O2, which just turned out to be their second to last show ever. I guess that was on Friday, March the 25th. And I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, I'm glad I got to see Genesis. The band were tight and great. The stage show with the lights and everything was amazing. It really was. But poor Mr. Phil Collins is not in great shape, and I think they're just trotting him out there, finishing up these dates, and then he's going to ride off into the sunset. We'll talk more about that as we get into the show. But we want to thank everybody for listening to last week's show where we had interviews with Amanda Lehman and Anna Stella, two women who rock. Got great reactions to the show. Amanda's talking about her new single, One Last Spin, which is an anti-gambling cause attached to it. And Anna Stella told us all about the UK rock festival she's covering this summer and new young bands that we all need to be aware of. It was a lot of fun to do those two interviews. Lots of great downloads and comments about that show, and we appreciate that. And of course, we're proud to be a member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. It's a collection of about 100 different music podcasts, all genres, with some amazing shows, some great podcasters, some creative folks who really do a great job of putting together something you want to listen to and to get interviews that, just like us, as we try to improve our show to stay up to the standards of our fellow Pantheon podcasters. And speaking of which, Pantheon is running our new 90-second clip, which you can download at the end of most all Pantheon podcasts coming out in this week. And we appreciate that greatly. We're so proud to be part of the network. And we hope that people hear it, not only want to download and subscribe to our show wherever you get it, where it's Amazon, Google, Spotify, Apple. Good Pods has been great to us lately. Wherever you go, please download and subscribe. And think about leaving us a positive review. It just helps us find more fans like you. And if we get a hold of it, we might just read it on the air. There's a lot of great Pantheon podcasts to discover, and I encourage you to check them all. You can go at Pantheon Pods or www.pantheonpodcast.com. But enough business. Let's get on to the fun. Jackson and I hadn't seen each other in almost a year. Jackson had never visited me in the 3 years that I've been living in London, thanks to COVID, thanks to travel restrictions. But we had a great time just being together, being able to run around London and hunt down a few historic spots, including the Chelsea drugstore, which is now a McDonald's, including Swan Song Records, including the spot where they took the picture of Pink Floyd's Animals cover, Battersea Power Station. Just a lot of fun. And talking about Genesis as they wrap up their careers, their live touring careers. I was glad to be a part of it. Was a bit of a disappointment, but let's get into that. We're going to do a rock tour of London and Genesis' second to last show here on The Wolf.
Here we are together again for the first time, broadcasting this time not from somewhere in Florida, but from jolly old England.
Yeah, first London reunion of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast. And we've had a pretty fun day, man.
Yeah.
We had some nice rock and roll tour that took us all over London to see all sorts of amazing places in English rock history. And Lee, our guy, God, that guy. If you think we know a bunch of minutia, you got to meet this guy, man. He is unbelievable. He's off the charts.
Highly recommend it. Had a lot of stuff. There was some stuff that had always been there. Abbey Road, you can go back there and pick that up, no problem. But there were a lot of places that had since become other places that I would have never have picked up on, that he was able to give us the tour and give us the inside information onto these different places. Including where the place where Steve Clark from Def Leppard, one of our favorites, passed away. Didn't know that was in London, didn't know where it was, but it was pointed out to us. and just added to the layering of the tour. What was the highlight of the tour for you?
Highlight of the tour. I don't know. We saw a lot of cool things. I mean, it was cool to see Jimmy Page's house, I thought, because, we had Christy Alexander Hallberg on the show who wrote Searching for Jimmy Page, and she had been there, obviously, and it's kind of part of her book, not to give too much away. But, yeah, I thought that was pretty neat because, we love Jimmy. I mean, he's, first day we met, I put a Jimmy Page poster on our wall. And, so that was pretty cool. But when he took us to the little side street it was like three buildings right next to each other. Mm-hmm. One was an old dairy that became an incredible sound studio where a lot of great music was recorded.
Including that was where the first Pink Floyd tracks
Arnold Lane and See Emily Play were recorded. And some greats play there. And then basically next door to that was where Steve Clark spent his final days, right across the street from a pub because he needed to clean up from his alcohol problem.
Probably not the best idea. Yeah, I didn't even know. I mean, I knew the story of Steve Clark, but I didn't know the actual final place, and would never have known that without it being pointed out to me.
So, and for our buddy Neil, at Def Lep Pod, that was a big. We sent him the picture. I hope you like that, Neil. But and then right next door to that was Eric Clapton's house, allegedly. And he's like, I bring people here all the time, and the gates were open. He's like, well, I've never seen the gates open. He's been doing this for 6 years, and he's like, I've never seen the gates open. So we got to take pictures through the gates of Eric Clapton's home, which is maybe a little creepy. So we didn't stand out there too long. But it was like, God, this one just random little street. And I could have walked down there. I could live down the street from there and walk past it every day. Right. And I never would have gotten any of that.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, you could probably say the same thing about Abbey Road if it didn't have the sign out in front of it. Once you stop and you look at it, you say, oh, yes, I've seen this building before I know it. And the crosswalk, too. You've seen it a million times. But if you weren't paying attention, you just blow right through it.
And, it took us to Battersea Power Station, where of course, the Animals classic cover with the pig flying over it by Pink Floyd. It didn't have quite the color as the album cover did, but it was kind of a hazy day down there. But, I mean, this guy Lee knew everything. He's like, they're having trouble selling because Battersea Power Station is now like condos or, I think they have other things in there too, but they've been having a hard time selling it. But Sting apparently bought, the big one upstairs or whatever. I'm like, yeah, well, Sting can do that.
And the nice part about that deal was that not only did he show us the power plant, but he showed us about where the same vantage point was where they took the photo for the album cover. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That was cool. His knowledge and the way he loves rock and roll, obviously, loves the minutia like we do. I mean, I can't hold a candle to his knowledge, certainly not of everything we saw in London today. But I think he gave us some respect that, we did know enough. Right. We weren't like the rookies they just saw the Elton John biopic.
Oh, Rocket Man.
Yeah, they just saw Rocket Man. I was like, hey, let's go to England and see where Elton John played.
Allegedly, on one of the other tours, there was a question about which instrument George Harrison played. So we didn't ask him that.
Yeah, exactly. We're a little past that, No, we had a great time. I mean, just seeing some of the hangouts and haunts of the Beatles and the Stones, and we're talking about early 60s and mid 60s, I mean, some of this is really hallowed ground for rock and roll junkies like us. I mean, this is where it all started. Yes, you would work and do your thing during the day, but then you would go hang out with the like-minded people, right? And the people on your level, certainly, And to see not only Brian Epstein's house, but then down the back alley to the old bar. It was secretly a gay bar where, he and the Beatles used to hang out. And, it was great for him to be able to pull boys down a back alley back to his house instead of out on, in public, with because Mick Jagger has to do that for the most part, right? So just crazy stories, all these little fun details. And it's just amazing how much rock and roll history lives in England and in London, in London town.
I mean, there are other spots. I mean, we talked about Birmingham on the Duran Duran episode, but yeah, certainly London. I mean, we spent three? Actually, it was more than 3 hours, probably 3.5, 3:40. We could have easily spent another 3 hours on there, going to different places. He had a whole Queen section that we didn't get to, but I mean, I'd love to see that definitely take the tour again. Highly recommended if you want to see the rock and roll spots of London.
Yeah, and he has different ones. I mean, I think he has a Led Zeppelin one, he's a Beatles one, a Stones one. Usually he mixes them together because everybody likes a little bit of that stuff, right? But to give him all the
credit that he deserves,
yes.
definitely was more of the more that you know and the more that you can interact with him, I think the better the tour gets. Also, I would say the smaller the group, the more conversations you can have.
Yeah, because it's just the two of us, but he's got a bigger van. You can put 6 people in there, I'm sure, if you really want to, 7. But, Jackson and I thought this would be a fun way to kind of to spend a little time together, right? We'll see some stuff that we've never seen before, and hopefully we'll get a tour guide who knows what he's talking about. And boy, howdy did we, man. That was great. And it's rocktours.co.uk. Lee is your man, and he's fun, He loves rock music, and I guess he used to have a bit of a social media following, but I guess he's kind of got off the grid on that, and well, I understand that, but
yeah, does a lot of his own research. He told us a couple stories that he put together himself. He had bits and pieces, put the clues together as far as the dates that things happened, and had some knowledge that was kind of shocking on a couple of the things.
Yeah, I'm not going to get too into it.
No.
Don't want to reveal too much.
Right. But there were definitely things that he brought up that some of the stuff was like, yeah, I think I've kind of heard that somewhere before, or that name sounds familiar. But there were a couple of things where I had to do a double take, and shocking.
I know. And usually, someone who can stump me and Jackson, well, anybody can know any little 1-bit detail about something that we don't know. But that he can stump us both like repeatedly. And have you ever heard of? And like, no. But we're not English, so we didn't grow up here. We don't have all the references he does. He was about 10 years older than us, but his knowledge was fantastic, and he was super. He couldn't have been nicer.
I think he's read every rock book on the face of the earth.
Yeah, man. I think we're gonna have a lot of rock book recommendations for you coming out of this. Going to Swan Song was cool. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're big Zeppelin fans, but he took us on a few different spots. Going to the Swan Song offices, which I never would have found. I wouldn't even thought to have looked them up. And we got a picture taken there, but then also it was right down the street from where the Sex Pistols were kind of like stationed, where they were managed. And he was telling us Malcolm McLaren had a big thing for Peter Grant, and I guess admired him, and it was producing, was it a film?
I think so, yeah.
About Peter Grant?
Yeah. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but the interesting thing you're talking about Swan Song, Lee had laminate stuff where he would show you the original pictures or pictures from history.
Right.
But we were talking about Swan Song, and he had a picture of Iron Maiden, Heart, and Paul Young. Mm-hmm. Every time you go away, Paul Young. And he's asked, why do you think I have these photos? We had no idea. Right. Well, they were cleaning Swan Song out. They found unheard, unopened demo tapes from those 3 acts that they just never... obviously they went on to have fame and fortune elsewhere, but could have potentially been part of the Swan Song family. Could you imagine Maiden and Swan Song?
Yeah. What if Jimmy had somehow gotten involved? Or, look, you can't deny Rod Smallwood's success managing Iron Maiden, but what if Peter Grant had been there to guide Rod Smallwood?
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's amazing. But no, I guess they said, when we've got a new record label. All right, hey, send us your tapes. There were probably, thousands of tapes, most of which are pretty bad.
Right.
But, hey, Iron Maiden's got one, Heart, and Paul Young, of all people. But it's just little details like that. When we went to Jimmy Page's house, he knew, of course, the whole history of how it was built, who owned it, how the guy who built it took him 6 years to build it, but then we moved in and 3 months later he died.
Yeah. The whole Jimmy Page versus Robbie Williams dispute about, I guess, Robbie, who has a 17, it was bigger than that because he's got 17
It's
bathrooms.
47 rooms and 17
right.
bathrooms.
That's right. He then wanted to add on an entire back portion of it, including an underground, I believe, movie theater or sound studio or something, and Jimmy just put the kibosh on all of that, which apparently led Robbie Williams to say he was like a psychopath.
Yeah.
And
then Robbie Williams won the case so he could do it, and then he didn't do it and he sold the house. So who's the psychopath, Robbie?
Right, yeah, just...
show some respect, boy band.
That is weird because I would have thought he would have just been over the moon to be living next to Jimmy Page, but apparently he was a little too big for his britches.
Yeah, whatever. I think we're bigger in the United States than Robbie Williams is.
So yeah, definitely 3 hours well spent. Would highly recommend it. And I think the other thing too is like if you're really into it, I think you can customize the tour.
Well, that's right. Like I said, I think he has a Zeppelin, like a pure Zeppelin tour, and maybe you could get all the way out to Olympic in Barnes, which is pretty far away. Obviously, there's all sorts of Beatles ones. We started out going to Savile Row, which is cool because in my 3 years of living here, I never went there. Ample opportunity, yes, but I never went there before because I walk by Abbey Road Studios basically every other day. So I'm like, all right, I get my Beatles fix around here. But then to be there and just kind of realize and just see the lay of the land, it's I don't know, watching Get Back even a few times, it's different being on the street versus just watching it on the film.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's no I don't know. They have an official name. Those blue plaques that commemorate historic landmarks. They don't have one there in front of the old Apple studio. And
They do.
They do?
Yeah.
Well, then what am I missing then? Oh, they don't have one.
Brian Epstein.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's what we were talking about. But I mean, it's you would probably walk past it also. Mm-hmm. But when you stop and look at it, then it all comes back to, oh, this is the actual spot. You get to look up and see it. I mean, we obviously couldn't see the roof, but you could look up and have the perspective on that day of somebody being on the street and not knowing what was going on, but hearing the music. It must have been, I don't know. I guess it would have been pretty epic because, the last time the Beatles had played live was years ago. So you knew something big was happening. I don't think you knew it was that. I don't think you would have understood you were watching the last performance.
Yeah, and having seen Get Back and see how they, you go downstairs to the studio, you can go up to the offices or whatever. You see those are the railings, those are the steps. That's exactly where it is. It was, it's neat, and he's like, and that, well, it says Abercrombie and Fitch on the outside. Now, he said when it was Abercrombie and Fitch, they were smart enough to do it, so they had stuff you can go upstairs and you could go up on the roof. I'm like, well, yeah, that is smart. Good idea. I don't know if it was the pandemic that closed Abercrombie and Fitch, or people just said it's not 1998 anymore, and we don't need an Abercrombie and Fitch so much at this high retail space in London because that building's got to be worth tens of millions of pounds. Yeah. Just even if the Beatles never did anything there, without the provenance of it, just the real estate in central London is worth that. And then you add that on top of it, that's an expensive piece of property. It would be sad if it was turned into offices or residential condos or something like that, because it should become a museum, or some kind of public thing.
It should be a historic landmark.
Yeah.
Lee did say something about McCartney buying it. I mean, who knows? But the city of London should do something with it. At least in part because it is such a huge landmark from the Beatles. And I remember that scene when they first got there and there were those two girls that would stand there every day. I guess birds, they call them here.
The apple scruffs.
Yes. And just that's the exact spot to see where they would stand there and just wait all day for them to come in. And it's overwhelming.
Yeah. So, and a lot of little things like that and, stuff that, this used to be a pub, now it's a whatever it is, it's a convenience store. It's, whatever it's in these modern times it's turned into. The first first EMI studios are, a pizza place now. And then it's when they, finally moved over to Abbey Road. But, it's great. He knew all this stuff. We went to the place where Jimi Hendrix died.
Yeah.
We went to the place where Carly Simon did her famous album cover.
Yeah, for You're So Vain.
Oh, she's so foxy. I love you, Carly.
If you're listening.
Wherever you are, I love you.
But what was it, the drugstore where Mick went into?
The Chelsea drugstore.
The Chelsea drugstore, is now a McDonald's. But again, I would have never known that. I would have just been like McDonald's. But yeah, to have him point that out there where he went in to have a soda with Mr. Jimi.
Yeah, on the King's Road.
Yeah.
Which was just for King Charles II. His run from the palace to Kew Gardens. Nobody else could be on it but him. And then the first place they built, the Pheasantry, is a place that Eric Clapton had lived. So, he was so full of knowledge, and just to hear all this stuff was so much fun. It bothered me that he said he was nervous picking us up.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, I guess he usually has people, who are casual fans. He's got to think about, all right, what should I tell these people that would be interesting to them? Because he did listen to a couple of our shows. And he's like, when am I going to get to talk? And I'm like, well, look, man, we're here to listen to you. We talk on our show, and we edit out all the parts where we sit there and stare at each other for 30 seconds silently because we can't think of what we want to say next. Make it sound like we have this amazing conversation, this banter that goes back and forth. But really, like, I'm talking to you for like 25 minutes now.
That was really cool.
I really want to do something else. That's fun. I mean, and there's a lot of different ways you can do it. I mean, he's not the only one in town, obviously, but he's the only one I need to go back to. That's right. For sure. I would go back to him tomorrow to do a different, see all the different stuff. Absolutely. So thank you, Lee. And hey, you want to get the English perspective on stuff? We got to get Lee on the show.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Interesting because I asked him on the way out what his favorite album of all time was, and he said Blood on the Tracks from Bob Dylan. Interesting that a Brit would, out of everything that's come, out of everything we saw today, out of every band that's come out of here, it's Bob Dylan. And so, yeah, love to get his take on that. Kind of the English perspective. Somebody who grew up here listening to American music. I mean, we're kind of the same way growing up in America listening to English music. I guess you want what you don't. You think it's great it's what's not from there.
Right, the exotic.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So, yeah, but I mean, we could have him on. We could probably have him on once a month.
Absolutely. Yeah. And he would educate us to no end with details of names and dates and places. And he's going to send us some pictures and stuff like that. And he once had 1,000 times the followers we had on social media.
That. Yeah, I mean, that was insane. When he said the amount, I thought maybe he was adding some zeros to it, but I had him repeat it, and no, he was that many. So, yeah, obviously somebody who's very passionate about the subject, knows a lot about it, and it doesn't seem like he would ever get tired of talking about it because we had more of a conversation than just a tour guide, and I think he enjoyed it, and we definitely enjoyed it and had a great day.
Hi, this is Christy Alexander Hallberg, author of the novel Searching for Jimmy Page, and you're listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast.
You want to transition over to Genesis?
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure what I want to say and don't say about Genesis, man.
Okay.
This is...
Well, I mean, it started at the beginning. You've been looking forward to this show for how long?
Yeah, for a long time. I mean, look, so our background with Genesis is that we grew up on 80s Genesis because we were MTV children. And of course, Phil Collins, too. Not to mention Mike and the Mechanics.
Right.
They always get overlooked, but that's kind of part of the family as well. We grew up on the 80s, and of course, Genesis was all over MTV in the 80s. They're all over America in the 80s. Just to give you some perspective on sales, and this is not Phil Collins, this is just Genesis. All right, because in the 70s, they were maybe gold selling artists, here in America, maybe even in Britain, gold. And then there were three, which is the first album, just to have the three of them, Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford, and Phil Collins, who are the three members of Genesis today and have been for, since 1978. Mm-hmm. That went gold on both sides. Then in 1980, Duke, platinum in Britain, platinum in the U.S., okay? Then Abacab comes. Oh, now it's double platinum in America, going gold other places. Then they do 1983's self-titled Genesis, and it's 4 times platinum in America, twice in Britain, platinum a few other places, and then Invisible Touch is the big one, right? I mean, it's like 16 million copies sold.
Yeah.
6 million in the U.S. alone. It's 4x platinum in Britain. It's top 10 all around the world. Huge. And then We Can't Dance, which I personally don't like. We can get into that more in a minute.
But that was big though, because I remember that was on MTV when we were in college.
Yeah.
And
our freshman year. Yeah.
I Can't Dance. Was that the?
That's the big one.
That was on all the time.
And it sucked every time. But we're going to get into that. But it also had No Son of Mine, which at the time was kind of a very bold song, about, a father not respecting his gay son. And look, I mean, top 10 and number 1 in a ton of places all over the world. 4x platinum in America, 5x platinum in Britain. They sold a lot of records. And that doesn't include Phil Collins' solo career.
Yeah, because we were talking about that before. Like, if during the 80s, Phil Collins never really went away. He was either doing Genesis or he was doing his solo stuff. And he worked with Eric Clapton, doing production and drumming. He also had the big, what was that, Easy Lover with Philip Bailey, which was not technically his record, but he was all over that too.
Helped sell Chinese Wall in a big way for Philip Bailey, no doubt about it.
Played with Led Zeppelin during the Live Aid performance.
Yeah, but we don't like to talk about that.
We don't like to talk about that, but it is a thing that did happen.
Yeah. Starting in we had Abacab and Duke were the 80-81 records for Genesis. In 81, he put out a little record called Face Value, which went to number 1 and top 10 all over the world. Look at this. 5 times platinum in the U.S., 5 times platinum. Britain 4 times in Australia. Diamond. Oh, my goodness. Platinum in the Netherlands. I mean, all over the world, this thing sold a ton. Okay, all right. Well, great. That's a great first one.
Okay.
All right, well, now they're going to push you to put a second one out the next year. Yeah. Before you do a Genesis album, Hello, I Must Be Going. Yeah, okay, well, that's only 3 times platinum in the U.S. and 3 times platinum. Plus, he was doing, Against All Odds soundtrack at that time, right? And that shoots up, and it's he's all over the place, right? So, all right, then 83, he's back to Genesis, but then he does No Jacket Required. Look at the number ones all over the world.
That one sell, okay?
Diamond, 12 times platinum in the U.S., 6 times platinum in Britain, diamond in Canada. I mean, platinum all over the world. Huge! And then they do Invisible Touch.
Right.
And then he does But Seriously, which was number 1 apparently everywhere in the whole world.
Yeah.
4 times platinum in the U.S., 9 times platinum in Britain, 7 times platinum in Canada, Australia. I mean, huge! And then he does We Can't Dance, which may not have been that good, but it sold incredibly well. And then he did something called Both Sides, which I was kind of unaware of. But it did go platinum because it came out junior year
93
of college. And it was kind of I was over him at I Can't Dance,
Yeah.
I was not paying attention anymore. But platinum around the world, so that's pretty impressive. Plus, then eventually he got an Academy Award for the Jungle Book song that he did. And that sold platinum, yes.
Wow.
He has an Oscar. He's got a live album that we had, Serious Hits Live.
Oh, yeah, that was good.
I had that when I bought it at the used store across the street.
That was definitely
Park Avenue Records.
$6 or whatever it was.
Yeah, well, I had 4 times platinum, 4 times platinum, 2 times platinum. I mean, the guy was a money-making machine. But that's how we got into Genesis, right? It was from 80s. And it was just about 8 years ago or so. They did a BBC documentary, Some of the Parts, I think it was called. And it got over to Showtime, I think, in the U.S., so I watched it. I'm a sucker for a good rock and roll documentary. And I didn't know the backstory. I really only knew Genesis since they became the 3 of them in the big hit machine, right? In the late 70s and into the 80s. But I knew Peter Gabriel had been in the band. And I knew they had this guy named Steve Hackett who had been in the band, but I didn't really know anything by him. Mm-hmm. I knew he had been in a band called GTR with Steve Howe of Yes and Asia, and I love Steve Howe's playing. So I'm like, okay, I'll watch this. And I thought it was fascinating. I watched it, 10 times in 5 days or something like that. Just couldn't get enough of it. And it had an accompanying release, kind of. I mean, the band ended up releasing something called Archive. Letter R-Kive, K-I-V-E, 3-disc set that went through Genesis over the years, but it also threw in their solo stuff. So when Peter Gabriel went solo, they had Salisbury Hill on there. And they had It in the Air in the Night for Phil Collins, and they said Run Silent, Run Deep for Mike and the Mechanics. And then they had Steve Howe on there. I had Steve Hackett on there, and they had the song called Every Day.
Okay.
And I heard this song every day. I'm like, that's an amazing song. That's such a good song. It's got good melody. It's got good lyrics. The solo at the end is epic. And it came out around the time, late 70s, where you were hearing epic solos like stuff from Eddie Van Halen and things like that. So, Angus Young was doing his thing then. So I'm like, why wasn't this a bigger hit? And that's when I got into Steve Hackett's back catalog and then came to realize, hey, Steve Hackett is very active. He makes a new album every couple of years, and he tours about every year and puts out a DVD and a live thing for most every tour. So when I started to get into Steve Hackett, I'm like, he's amazing, and I never knew this music because they never played it in America.
And I think we talked about this before, so we got into Genesis from the Genesis record, and that's nothing like the back catalog.
Right.
And then, so they had other records, and I think I listened to The Lamb Lies Down, and I said, well, I don't really care for this.
And The Invisible Touch is kind of cheesy for us at that point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it was ubiquitous.
Right. But I remember that album, but I didn't own it or anything.
Yeah.
So I think I listened to The Lamb Lies Down and said, well, if this is Genesis, then I think I'm okay, not listening to that. But then to go back and hear the other stuff, you're right, the Steve Hackett stuff, which you turned me on to, and then to go back and listen to, the Selling England by the Pound, which we did an episode on.
Number 28.
Yeah, and that is good stuff, but it's not what we were listening to in college because it's not guitar riff driven.
Right. I mean, we're Zeppelin, Cult, was the stuff that we liked to listen to. Guns N' Roses was huge when we were in college, and then when you got into stuff like Alice in Chains or Stone Temple Pilots, and we just did the last show that we did on Keith Richards, or a couple shows back, or the next show. I don't know when we're going to release that. That's the kind of stuff that we were into. We even listened to Kiss. So progressive rock, as it was not called back then. I don't know when the term progressive rock came into play.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know if 20 years ago I'd heard. In 2002, I bet I hadn't heard progressive rock.
No. Yeah.
Right? So it's just another way to market this stuff, I suppose. And I like Prog Magazine and all, but I'm not sure where the term originated. Maybe that would be something someone could help us with out there. But now I'm like, this is great stuff, so I want to learn more about it. And it is, thinking man's rock, or thinking person's rock, sorry. It's not just cars and chicks and stuff.
Not that there's anything wrong with cars and chicks.
Hot rods and chicks.
There you go.
But maybe you do have to be a little older. I mean, I don't know. There's plenty of teenagers who've been turned on to Genesis and Pink Floyd, and you put a lot of different bands in there: Rush, ELP, King Crimson, Yes, other bands that we like, or at least we like part of their stuff. But I don't know. I mean, then I was into okay, well then Genesis has this whole other thing, and a lot of people believe that that's the one and only, or that's the best version at least of Genesis. And there's a lot of tribute bands out there, and basically they all cover, not all of them, but most of them cover the really old stuff. Mm-hmm. When Peter Gabriel was the singer. Yeah.
And it's more the stuff that we used to listen to before, and still do. It's more like it's just a bed for the guitar to play over. Where this is more like more of a composition where everybody is contributing, and of course in the prog genre you have the great keyboard players who get a lot of the solo time. They share it with the guitar player.
Yeah, so you've got the great Keith Emerson, Tony Banks, Rick Wakeman. I guess you throw Tony Kaye from Yes in there too. I mean, really anyone plays. Yeah, Jeff Downes is one of our very favorites.
I mean, if you really want, we were talking about before, John Lord, throw him.
John Lord, I would throw him in there, even though they call it heavy metal. It's very proggy.
Right.
Rick Wright is the godfather of it, absolutely. Overlooking people, I'm sure. But, it just wasn't something necessarily American teenager. It was something you kind of had to search out. All those bands that we mentioned had some kind of hit on the radio. And if you're Yes, maybe you had a few more than, say ELP or King Crimson did. But see, Yes is another one where we're distorted on Yes because our first taste of Yes was Owner of a Lonely Heart.
Correct.
On MTV when we were 10 years old.
Yeah. So then if you go back and listen to the Topographic Ocean, that's just
it's
totally different.
Yeah. Or Drama. Yeah. Well, the voice isn't quite right, but it's like, God, I really love Drama, man. Tempest Fugue is so good, man. Don't kill the whale, man. That's all good. But so then, all right, so 8 years ago, I was starting to get into Steve Hackett in the old Genesis. I had an opportunity to go see Steve Hackett in the front row, and I took it, and I was blown away just how good he was and how professional he was, and so then I just became a big fan. And then coming over here now, I've seen Steve Hackett once in London. I'm trying to see him again, trying to get Jackson over for that. And so here's the other thing. Genesis has only toured twice the last 30 years. After I Can't Dance, and I would not have seen them on that tour because I'm like, they're going to play that song and I hate it and I don't want to see it. Plus, they were part of the past for us in 1991, 1992. That's not what we were into.
Yeah. And
grunge had happened even though we didn't like it, or at least I didn't. But it kind of was the death knell for, they say it's death knell for a lot of hair metal bands, but for me it was death knell for like those kind of older 80s pop groups, and Genesis. For us, at that point, from our knowledge, from our experience, that's exactly what they were.
Yeah, and you figure by 1991, 92, these guys were probably at least 10 years or maybe more younger than all the rest of those bands from the 80s. So yeah, I think it was kind of more like our music that we were getting to experience first, and not listening to something from the past that was a recommendation. I mean, even though the Genesis and the Yes stuff from the early 80s was something to listen to first, they were still older.
Right.
Like, these were the bands from the 90s were more contemporaries of ours. So I can see how, we would have just said, well, that's for kids stuff. And certainly at that point in time, we were not going to go back and listen to like Foxtrot or anything. That was just not, it just didn't have the, I mean, let's face it, we're Americans. We want instant gratification. You want the big hook. You want the lyrics that are clear, solo, and then you're done 4 minutes out. We're not listening to, 8, 9, 10-minute composition.
Right. And look where we were. We're 18 years old. Guns N' Roses just puts out Use Your Illusion albums, and Metallica puts out the Black album. But we're going to listen to Genesis and short little bald Phil Collins talking about You're No Son of Mine. I'm like, who cares, man? It was just not at the time. And, that one in particular, I still don't like that record. But going back and listen, even you go back and listen to Invisible Touch.
Yeah. It's not, I would not say I was a fan of that record. I remember it. I remember hearing it over and over and over again. But no, there was never a point in my life where I said, I need to own Invisible Touch.
Although I do own it because I get it for $5. Because they sold a jillion of them, But but going to find Selling England by the Pound, Wind in the Wuthering, Land Lies Down, Trick of the Tail, all those Steve Hackett things, and even and then there were three, which had the first Follow You, Follow Me kind of like single where they're like, our audience doubled overnight because suddenly girls were interested in that.
It was a little easier without Peter Gabriel and his flower outfit.
Right, but then, so they did I Can't Dance, the We Can't Dance tour, wasn't interested then. Then, eventually, Phil left the band. They did Calling All Stations with Ray Wilson, and it missed. I mean, it was waylaid and not what people were into. I think they certainly canceled the U.S. tour. I think they toured in Europe and the U.K. a bit, but they couldn't even sell the U.S. tour. And then they were kind of done. And then in 2000, I guess 6 or 7, they did the Turn It On, I think it was Turn It On Again tour. And allegedly, they were toying with the idea and working on putting the 5 of them from the 70s heyday back together.
Okay.
That's what that tour was supposed to be. So they were doing that. And then from what I understand, and it makes the most sense, eventually Peter Gabriel said, nah, fuck this. I haven't had to deal with these guys in forever, and my life is good, and I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, and just getting involved in all this is just more mess than I need. It wouldn't have been Steve Hackett, and he comes out and says, it's never me. I'm not the one saying we're not going to do it. He, I think, would love it. But, yeah, Peter Gabriel doesn't need it, and so then they're like, all right, well, we already put stuff in motion to see about a tour. Now whatever we can do with that, we can do it 3 ways instead of 5. Why don't we do it? And that was their last big tour. And I remember when it happened, because we were, like 35 or 33 or whatever that was. And but they didn't come to Louisville. And I'm like, do I really want to go someplace, like travel far, spend a lot on Genesis tickets? I don't even really like them that much because it's still, at this point in 2007, I had discovered Steve Hackett or the Peter Gabriel years. Okay. So I'm like, nah, I don't think so. I mean, besides at that point, you had seen bands like, oh, we can get back together and then we just do this every 3 years?
Right.
Let's do that. So I figured, all right, if I really want to do it, that'll probably happen. But then Phil started having some bad times, and he had some alcohol problems, another divorce, and then he started having all these physical issues. So he did play some drums on that tour. I've got that Roma DVD, or it's actually really good. Or I've got the live album. It's actually really good, but eventually it became he's not going to be able to do that. It's like, okay, well, he can step out and sing. We can get a drummer. Chester can do it, whatever. But then his health really started to deteriorate. And I think because of his back issues and his surgeries and some injuries he's had from there, he's kind of chair or scooter ridden.
That's what it looks like. Yeah, it looks like he even on his last tour that he did for his own stuff, he was not getting out of that chair. I think they could have had a better one for him. It looks like kind of an office chair. Like you'd think he needs that, what is it, that Dave Grohl throne?
Right, the Axl Rose used. Yeah, I mean, see, that's the thing, man. I mean, like, you're already short, you're already bald. can we get you something that makes you look regal or something like that? It's like look, I hate to kick him in when he's down and he's obviously in a lot of pain. But he kind of hobbles out there with a cane, and then he sits there in his chair with his gut hanging over his junk, gripping the mic, because I don't know if he can grip it with the other hand because it has some nerve damage. Look, I'm glad I saw Genesis play.
So how did he sound? How does his voice sound?
He sang all the words pretty well. He didn't take that many off. And it was generally in key. And he had a couple of young men. One was named Patrick Smith, and one, I'm going to botch his name, so I'm not going to come up with it. But anyway, and one of them sounded a little bit like him. So they could sing behind him a little bit and beef it up a little bit. But they could also sing
fill in the low spots
for him if he wants to take one off. And sometimes he would point the microphone to the crowd and say, I sing, then you sing kind of thing. But it wasn't like Freddie Mercury. Oh! It was like he was passing the lighter or something like that, after he just lit his joint. God love him. I mean, from what I can see, he's in desperate pain. And from the interviews and the lack of banter between, he's obviously on some serious pain medicine. And I think he needs it. Yeah. But the sad thing is what that does to your speech, what that does to your brain, and the way you hold yourself and the way you move, like you're in a bit of a trance kind of thing, it's pretty obvious to me.
Yeah, that he was having a hard time.
And he apparently has been for years. And that's the thing about, I think it's gotten worse in these last 18 months and 24 months. Because when I bought the tickets, like, okay, we're going to do this. And it was supposed to take place about 18 months ago, like November of 2020. Or October, and then, COVID, we're not going to do it. We'll move to April 2021. No, okay, we'll move to October 2021. No, okay, we'll do it in March of 2022. So, I'm fortunate I got to see it. But they were always going to do these European dates later. So last year, it was because October was postponed because Mike Rutherford got COVID. It wasn't just like, we can't do the show. Because I went to see Steve Hackett in October of last year. They had, I think it was Birmingham and maybe 3 London dates, but they were always going to come back. Then they were going to America. Then they were always going to come back and do Europe this spring. But what made it cool is they went and did Europe, and then they finished here in London, which they would have finished in Paris or Amsterdam or something like that.
Okay.
If they hadn't. But they had to come back and do these London dates. So I saw the second to last Genesis show ever.
Yeah, this can't be anymore. They've got to call it now. I know we were talking about, I did see an interview with the three of them, and the interviewer said something about the last Genesis tour, and Phil Collins said, yeah, well, you never know what's going to happen, and both Banks and Rutherford behind him were like, there's just no way. There's no way that they can go on like this. He's just too frail at this point in time. Unless he makes some kind of miraculous recovery, which I don't know, I can't see them booking another giant world tour again.
I don't see Phil Collins being out in the public eye, period, again. Unless he gets another surgery and it helps him be able to walk and walk with a normal gait and fairly pain-free again, I don't see it happen. I don't see them rolling him out anymore. He did his farewell solo tour, and this is it. And look, the band were great, okay? Everyone else, Nicholas...
Yeah, how did he do?
Nicholas Collins.
Yeah.
You always got to be a little skeptical because, gee, how'd you get that job? He did an amazing job in hitting all this stuff from all the years. He did a fantastic job, and I think he's got a bright career doing what he wants to. And Daryl Sturmer, who has been with them, basically since Steve Hackett left. Yeah. Daryl Sturmer has been their guitar player for 45 years. And he's fantastic. And even on Firth of Fifth, something that I love and hold dear off Selling England by the Pound. He did it. He did not do it better than Steve Hackett, but I think I could say he did it as well.
Okay.
And he's played it a ton over the last 45 years. They don't take it out of the set list. So he was great. Rutherford was good because he has a couple of cool things where he's got a guitar and a bass. He's got a 12-string guitar, double bass, all that kind of thing. It was cool. And Tony Banks, he was great. He doesn't smile. He's such an proper English Charterhouse schoolboy. He doesn't smile when he's playing because he's working, I guess. But even when Phil introduces the band, he's like Tony Banks. He kind of sits there with his lips pressed together. I'm like, come on, man. These are your last shows ever with Genesis? Smile, you sack. But the visuals, man.
Oh yeah, you were saying the
screen behind and the light canopy over it, which could bend and it would go down and up and cantilever, and it was an amazing stage show. The presentation was fantastic, and they would put pictures of the three of them up all the time because even though we had good seats, we're still pretty far away. Yeah. Amazing place, the O2, but yeah, I mean, it's just, he would sing it, but he didn't have the inflection that he used to. Especially on something like Turn It On Again. Yeah. Turn it on. Or like Home by the Sea. I love Home by the Sea. It's kind of a deep cut off of off of Genesis.
Off of Genesis. But I mean he sings on the record anyway. He's pretty forceful.
Exactly. When he goes, sit down, sit down, sit down. Now it's sit down, sit down, sit down. There's no sit down. It's sit down. And maybe the guys in the background do the more sit down. So it's disappointing. Okay. I mean, and he should be standing up to get the diaphragm out. I mean, I know plenty of people play at the piano and sing, and there's drummers that sing, but if you want to sing, you got to stand, and you can't do that. And so overall, the show was really neat. Visuals were amazing. The band was tight. And there's some that ended up pretty good. Afterglow was good. They did an acoustic, they did an acoustic set. Okay. Where they dismissed the backup singers, and it was just the five of them. And they kind of switched places on stage. I mean, except for Phil. Tony had kind of an electric piano kind of thing. Yeah. And they reworked a few things. They did That's All, Lamb Lies Down, and Follow You, Follow Me. And, I'm with my wife, and, we get to love on her and do Follow You, Follow Me, and it's a little different. Yeah. I thought it was really cool, So, and, No Son of Mine, because there's so much music in it, you can't hear that his voice is bad. Yeah. So, I mean, there were some songs where you couldn't do it. But honestly, Jackson, I was like, sometimes I was just shaking my head like I'm waiting for what I know is supposed to come. And then I hear what he croaks out, and I just shake my head like, damn it. I should have seen him 15 years ago because this is a box checker. It's an honor that I could say I went to their second to last show ever. But I found him late in life, and this was my first opportunity. And I'd say it's a disappointment. It's a disappointment.
Man, I'm sorry to hear that because I know you were looking forward to it for so long. I mean, obviously, we hope that Phil gets better, feels better, and maybe this is what he needs also to kind of take some time off and the tour is over, so, go home, recuperate. Right. We'd love to see you do something else again, even if it's not a tour, because, like we were talking about, for the 80s, he was ubiquitous with the 80s. I mean, you could not get away from him. He was always around, and we even forgot that. What was that one about? I think it was White Nights. He did the. Oh yeah. I don't think that was on one of his albums, but that was another huge hit that was all over the place.
Martin, I can't remember the girl's name.
Yeah, and then Against All Odds, that was another one. That was a huge hit for him. Yeah, he was a big part of the 1980s. Guested on Miami Vice.
That was great. Phil the Shill.
That's right.
Phil the Shill. Much better than Ted Nugent, although Ted Nugent looked awesome. And Phil was a better actor.
He did drive a cool Corvette in that one. But yes. Yeah, because I think he'd been in a couple of movies already, right? By the time he made it to TV?
Yeah, and he was kind of a child actor. Like, he's allegedly on Hard Day's Night, one of the kids in the movie. He's done a couple things over the years, but he's a multi-talented guy, I didn't realize how, in America, he became kind of disliked or a butt of a joke in the 2000s. It was like, thank God, we're out of the Phil Collins years where, it was all generic and cheesy. But over here, it was that, and I guess he came off as arrogant in a lot of interviews or whatever, and so the press really turned against Phil over here.
Really?
Like, it was like the fans kind of turned against him because he's like cheesy. Yeah. But over here it was that, and the press were just like, he's a dick, Or,
I mean, didn't he sell like 100 million records on his own?
Yes.
So, I mean,
there's a question. So there are three people who've sold 100 million albums or records, which I think includes singles, as a part of a band, and then also as a solo artist. Okay. I said there are these three people. Who do you think they are?
Well, there's going to be Paul McCartney,
and everyone usually gets that one.
That's pretty big. Let's see who else was big in a band and then big on their own. Like, I'd say Eric Clapton, but I don't think he sold that many.
Not as a band.
Yeah, not as a band. I don't think so.
Who was the biggest artist when we were kids, 8, 9, 10 years old?
Was it? No, I don't know. Who was it?
We were kids in 1982.
Yeah. Who am I thinking of?
The album that sold 50 million copies.
Oh, Michael Jackson.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Although, did the Jackson 5s? I guess they did sell that many.
I mean, I think between singles and everything,
Yeah, so obviously Michael Jackson. Well, then, okay, so that's 2. And then 3, and then so 3 would be Phil Collins.
And nobody ever gets Phil Collins. They come up with Michael Jackson. They come up with Paul McCartney like, Phil Collins, are you serious? Say, yep.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the problem, too, is that there are a lot of people that you probably can't distinguish one from the other. Like, was that a Phil Collins song or was that Genesis? Especially from that era. But, yeah, I mean, you can't. I mean, how could you sell that many records and basically not come off as arrogant? I don't know. I mean, Michael Jackson was – I don't know that McCartney did a pretty good job of always kind of being Paul McCartney.
Yeah, he's an amazing man.
Yeah, just kind of like that cool, I was in the Beatles, but I've done some other things too you may have heard of. And then Michael Jackson, well, he was just lived on another planet.
Yeah, poor guy.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you finally came to London. I was here, all the stupid pandemic couldn't come over as much, and business, you do business over here, but they're like, nah, let's just do this on video conference.
Yep,
right?
Everybody's at home. They're not going to visit them there. So yeah, great to be back. I mean, it's definitely a city that is very accessible, especially as an American. Everything's in English, British. It's English. So there's a little bit of a difference.
But I can read it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that we are. Just really happy to be here. Great to come back and visit and to get to do this show not over Zoom is fun.
Yeah, we've got a couple of cool interviews coming up. Fun thing to share is Jay at The Hook Rocks, who has an amazing podcast and over 350 episodes. He ran a March Madness bracket, greatest album of all time, and somehow I won! It's the first time I ever won any kind of bracket ever. So thank you, Jay, for the opportunity, and I hope I get to talk to you about it here real soon. Part of the Pantheon Podcast family. Fantastic show, and he's on Zeppelin Chronicles with the boys from Shout It Out Loudcast, who, if you haven't heard us talk about them, this might be your first podcast first time listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London.
Yeah, had a great day. Yeah, great to be part of the Pantheon family, like we said before, and to get to kind of interact with these other people, too. Other shows on the network is fun.
Yeah, we're looking forward to having some real cool guests on, and, hopefully some of our Pantheon Podcast friends. Good to be in jolly London town. Will I be here forever?
You never know what the future brings.
Who knows? I'm just glad that while I was here, living here, Jackson, you got to come here. And we get to do, it was almost like a rock and roll scavenger hunt with a guy, Lee, who totally knew his stuff. I mean, who do we aspire to be? Kind of like that guy. I mean, the stuff that he knows is fantastic. The details, the people, the places, the timelines. And some of it, he was like, well, I read these 5 books, and then I figured out that this is how Pete Townsend got David Bowie's acetate of, what. I'm like, goodness, how do you even put that together, man? You're like a detective. We should make like documentaries or, rock and roll syndicated programs they can put on Axis and stuff back home and have that guy as one of our experts.
Yeah, the forensic rock and roll scientist.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thanks for listening to episode number 71 of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast. So good to have Jackson here in London, face to face, in the flesh. And we had a blast just being out, running around London with our new friend Lee, talking rock and roll, talking rock history, finding all these amazing old spots where all this amazing history has happened here in the city of London. Something I've wanted to do since I've lived here, but thanks to COVID and not being able to do everything you want to do over the last couple of years, I just haven't had the opportunity. And when Jackson came over, I said, yep, this is the time. And we had a blast. It was a good time, not just to see Jackson, but to see all these fun spots. Jimmy Page's house, Eric Clapton's house, the place where the Rolling Stones used to hang out, the place where the Beatles used to hang out. Just amazing stuff. A lot of fun. And, of course, I am happy that I got to see Genesis play. Their second to last show ever. Phil was in bad shape, but I'm glad that I got to check that box. I'm glad they got to go out on top at the O2 in London to wrap up their career. The visuals were amazing. The light show, the stage, the whole band sounded great. It's just hard to see Phil in that kind of shape. But let's just hope he gets the medical attention he needs. He gets maybe some surgery, some time to recover, and maybe he can be more his old self again one day. As usual, folks, we want to know, did we get something right? Did we get something wrong? Did we miss the point? Did we leave out your favorite part? Please let us know. You can tweet us or DM us at ugly_werewolf, or at ActionJack72. We're trying to branch out into other forms of social media like Instagram, like Facebook, so keep your eyes open for that stuff. And let us know which albums, which bands, which concerts, which DVDs, which rock properties you want us to review. And next week, we are very, very excited to announce that we will be interviewing Deborah Bonham and Pete Bullock of Bonham Bullock, who've put out an amazing blues record. It actually comes out April 29th. Of course, most people recognize the name Bonham. Yes, that's John Bonham's sister, Deborah, who is an amazing soul and blues singer. And her husband, Pete Bullock, who's been touring with Paul Rodgers for years. And they've made a few records together, Deborah and Pete. And this one's with some covers of some amazing blues tunes. And they couldn't have been nicer. We sat down and spoke with them for a while. And we can't wait to share that interview with you next time here on The Wolf. And of course, we are proud to be members of the Pantheon Podcast Network and community. So many great podcasts, music, all sorts of genres on Pantheon. We're proud to be a part of it. We're proud to have our 90-second promo running on all those shows coming out this week. So to all you rockers all around the world, until next week, be cool and stay safe.